Okay, students, we are going to talk about negative space and how you can use negative space to draw your bottles. So negative space, what is that? It is basically the space where objects are not. So in this case, the bottles are the positive space, and the background, the base that the bottles are standing on, and the fabric, that's all the negative space. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start another layer. I'm literally going to trace out the negative space. I'm not tracing the bottles. I'm going to trace some of the negative space so that you can see if I'm just looking at the negative space, the bottles will form out of that. That will make sense once I actually do it. Okay, so I'm going to start here with, I'm going to go ahead and change my pen to, that won't work when I move the thing away. Let's do a light blue. You can see it on there. So I'm looking at negative space. Let's go ahead and change it to monoline and a bit smaller. So I'm looking at this big chunk of space here, okay, this negative space. So I'm going to start with this negative space here. Again, I know it looks like I'm just tracing a bottle, but I'm really looking at this big chunk of space. When you are drawing your bottles, it's going to be helpful if you look at the negative space and the shapes that are created by the negative space. Okay, so I'm going to go right here. And you want to make sure that your negative space, you're actually looking at it in detail. Because if you're just guessing, then your bottles are not going to look accurate. They're going to look like you just kind of guessed what was there instead of actually looking at it. So I know, again, it looks like I am just tracing the bottles, but what I'm really doing is trying to make shapes around this negative space. And I'm looking at like the black fabric background more than the actual bottle, okay? And then I'm going to go to the bottom of this bottle here and look at the negative space there. I'm looking at this kind of like triangle of negative space and the shape of the fabric that's underneath of it. So this is going to help you form your bottles. Again, there's another triangle-ish shape. And then this big chunk of negative space is what I am looking at now. Yes, there is one more bottle over here. I'm just going to do that. Okay, so if I try to fill that in, I think it would just go everywhere. So I'm not going to try that. But what I am going to do is hide the layer one, okay? So you can see where the negative space here, like all this is negative space. All this, okay? The positive space is where the bottles actually are. Only this one right here is defined really well, just because these ones over here are overlapping, so you can't see the edges too well. This one goes off the edge. This one's laying down, and there's a bottle in front of it. Anyway, so you can't see the outline super well. I'm going to go ahead and take back all my scribbles and get this back on. But this will help you figure out your bottle shape. When you are trying to place your bottles too and get them accurate, what I want you to do is look at where the tops of bottles, like this one here, hit next to other bottles. So if on your paper, you end up drawing the top of that bottle and it almost like hits somewhere around here, but over here, of course, then you know, okay, that doesn't look right. I need to actually move the top of that bottle up, right? You need to compare where objects are in relation to the next closest object. So number one, start with that negative space. And number two, let's see if I can change my color here. Oops. Number two, you want to look at, how would I say this, objects relation to one another. Okay, that is how you're going to get your bottles to be more accurate. In the video that you're going to watch next after this, before you begin, I'm also going to talk about laying down highlights. So let's switch to this one. You want to mark where highlights are on your bottles so that you know where they're going to be. You can also mark shadows. You'll see me do this in the video too. I add little ovals to where, or even like long rectangles, where the highlights are going to be, so that I'm kind of preparing for that when I'm laying down kind of like medium tones. There's a lot of little highlights that really make a difference in the final piece. So again, think about how you can include those highlights to show a more realistic shading or value of those bottles. So if I was to take away that layer again, you'd have all these little tiny highlight guidelines, and I know they will look absolutely ridiculous at the beginning. You're starting with guides, and then once you have the guides down, that's when you'll start adding the values. So one last time, negative space is key, and looking at how objects relate to one another in the image, what you see with your eyes, that is how you're going to get this realistic looking. It's not going to be quick. This is time consuming because you're constantly looking back and forth at the setup, the still life, and your paper, and you're comparing what you see and how you interpret that in your paper. So please do not feel like you should finish this within a day. It might take you a day just to lay out the outlines. There's no way you could finish a full value charcoal in one class setting. Like I said, it might take you one day just to do these outlines, these highlight guidelines, maybe starting with kind of the shadows in the background even. You know, there's a lot that goes into it, and it becomes easier if you plan well. So use that negative space and look at how the objects are related to one another.